What begins as a routine spring, plowing on a struggling fourth-generation family farm, transforms into an extraordinary archaeological discovery when farmer Michael Harrington's old tractor blade strikes a peculiar metal box, setting off a chain of events that not only brings prestigious museum curators rushing to his remote property, but also uncovers a breathtaking collection of ancient artifacts that rewrites regional history and connects his humble farmland to a forgotten civilization that thrived over a millennium ago. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Michael Harrington had always believed that hard work and perseverance would eventually turn things around. His 120-acre farm, nestled in the rolling hills of western New York, had been in his family since 1892, each generation proudly passing down not just the land, but the principles of stewardship and resilience that had sustained the Harringtons through wars, economic depressions, and changing agricultural markets. The weathered red barn still displayed the hand-carved initials of his great-grandfather Elias, who had built it with timber harvested from the property's northern woods. The stone fence that marked the eastern boundary had been patiently assembled by his grandfather during the desperate years of the Great Depression, when selling crops barely covered property taxes. The ancient maple trees that lined the driveway had been planted by his father as a wedding gift to his mother, a living legacy now towering majestically over the farmhouse. But the past decade had been mercilessly challenging for Michael. Industrial agriculture had transformed farming from a family-centered way of life into a high-stakes business, requiring massive capital investment and economies of scale that small operations like his couldn't match. Global market fluctuations had driven crop prices to historic lows just as his operating costs soared. The drought of 2019 had withered his corn crop into brittle stalks, barely worth harvesting, while unprecedented flooding in 2021 had turned his lower fields into swampland until mid-June, far too late for effective planting. At 48, Michael faced the crushing reality that he might be the Harrington who finally lost the family legacy. His desk drawer contained an expanding collection of foreclosure warnings from Heartland Agricultural Bank, each letter more ominous than the last. The second mortgage he had taken out to replace the aging irrigation system now hung over him like a death sentence. Every morning, Michael woke at 4:30 a.m. with the same gnawing anxiety, calculating and recalculating diminishing options for keeping the farm solvent for just one more season. His kitchen table, where 4 generations of Harringtons had shared meals, celebrated harvests, and weathered hardships, had become a command center for financial triage. Spreadsheets and calculator, loan statements and deferral requests, all spread out beneath the warm glow of the pendant light his mother had installed 50 years earlier. The numbers never changed, no matter how creatively he rearranged them. The Harrington farm was less than 6 months from foreclosure. The farmer's market in Millfield, where his family had once proudly displayed their premium organic produce, had gradually become a painful reminder of his declining fortunes. His regular customers had slowly drifted to other vendors as his crop diversity diminished, and his once vibrant stand shrank to a humble table, offering whatever limited harvest he could manage with minimal help. The neighboring vendors, many of whom had known his family for decades, greeted him with sympathy, poorly disguised as casual conversation. Michael's most faithful companion through these difficult years was his elderly border collie, Jasper. At 14, the dog moved more slowly now, his muzzle frosted with grey, but his intelligent dark eyes still followed Michael with unwavering loyalty. In his younger years, Jasper had been an exceptional working dog, intuitively understanding how to move livestock and patrol the farm's perimeter. Now he mainly kept Michael company during long work days, offering silent solidarity when the burdens of failing finances became almost too heavy to bear. Recently, however, Jasper had developed an unusual fixation with the South Field, 20 acres of gently sloping land that had historically been used for rotating crops but had lain fallow for the past 2 seasons due to Michael's inability to afford adequate fertilizer and seed. The field bordered Maxwell Creek, a modest waterway that swelled with spring runoff but typically reduced to a gentle stream by midsummer. For days now, Jasper had been disappearing for hours, returning to the farmhouse with muddy paws and an unusual intensity in his gaze. When Michael investigated, he discovered the dog had been digging in a specific section of the South Field, creating a pattern of holes that seemed oddly deliberate. Michael initially attributed this to typical dog behavior. Perhaps Jasper had detected a groundhog colony or was following the scent of deer that frequently crossed the property. But the dog's persistence and the strange, focused pattern of his digging suggested something different. Whenever Michael called him away from the area, Jasper would reluctantly obey, but his body language conveyed unmistakable frustration, as if Michael were interrupting vital work. This behavior was completely out of character for the well-trained, typically obedient dog. The early spring of 2023 had brought unusually mild weather to western New York, allowing Michael to begin preparing his fields earlier than normal. This rare stroke of good fortune had given him a glimmer of hope. Perhaps with an extended growing season, he could maximize his limited resources and produce enough yield to at least make the next mortgage payment. With this desperate optimism, Michael had risen before dawn on a clear Tuesday morning in late March, determined to begin plowing the South Field. After a quick breakfast of black coffee and toast, he headed to the equipment shed, where his father's 1979 John Deere tractor waited. The machine was decades past its prime, held together with ingenuity, spare parts salvaged from junkyards, and the mechanical knowledge Michael had inherited from his father. Jasper, despite his arthritic joints, insisted on accompanying Michael, his excitement unusually pronounced as they approached the South Field. The dog trotted ahead, repeatedly circling back to ensure Michael was following, then leading him toward the specific area that had captured his attention for days. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "What's got you so worked up, old boy?" Michael asked as he climbed into the tractor's seat. "We've plowed this field dozens of times." Jasper barked sharply, an unusual sound from the typically quiet dog, and resumed, his focused circling of one particular section near the center of the field. Michael started the tractor, the engine coughing reluctantly before settling into a familiar rumble. He began the systematic process of plowing, creating neat furrows across the field, while Jasper paced anxiously nearby. The morning progressed. Productively, the rich soil turning over to reveal its dark promise, the familiar rhythm of the work, momentarily allowing Michael to forget his financial worries. As the sun climbed higher, Michael approached the section that had so captivated Jasper's attention. The dog became increasingly agitated, barking and running alongside the tractor with remarkable energy for his age. Michael had just begun to worry about the old dog overexerting himself when he felt a jarring impact through the tractor's frame. The plow blade had struck something solid, sending a metallic screech through the morning air. The tractor shuddered and the engine strained. Against the unexpected obstacle, Michael immediately disengaged the plow and shut down the engine, concerned he might have hit a buried pipe or piece of old farm equipment forgotten by previous generations. Jasper was already at the spot where the plow had struck, pawing excitedly at the freshly turned earth and whining with unusual intensity. Michael climbed down from the tractor, his concern about damage to the plow blade mingling with curiosity about what he'd hit. "Easy, Jasper," he soothed as he approached. "Let's see what's got you so worked up." Kneeling in the soft soil, Michael began carefully clearing away dirt from around the object. His fingers soon made contact with something distinctly unnatural. A flat, angular surface with a peculiar texture unlike stone or modern metal. As he excavated more soil, the outline of what appeared to be a rectangular box began to emerge, approximately 2 feet long and perhaps a foot wide. The object was clearly manufactured, not a natural formation, but it had an unusual appearance that Michael couldn't immediately place. It wasn't rusted iron like abandoned farm equipment might be, nor was it plastic or any common modern material. Instead, it had a distinctive patina and weight that suggested considerable age and craftsmanship. "What on earth?" Michael murmured as he cleared more soil away. The box appeared to have ornate designs etched or embossed on its surface, though they were partially obscured by compacted dirt. What had initially seemed like random patterns gradually revealed themselves to be intricate, deliberate decorations. Most curious of all was what appeared to be a complex locking mechanism, unlike anything Michael had encountered before. Jasper whined and pawed gently at the box, his earlier frantic energy now transformed into focused interest. The dog's behavior struck Michael as almost reverential, as if he somehow understood the significance of what they'd discovered. With growing excitement, Michael carefully extracted the box from its earthen tomb. It was surprisingly heavy for its size, suggesting it contained something substantial or was made of unusually dense material. The craftsmanship became more apparent as he brushed away centuries of accumulated soil. Whoever had created this had been a skilled artisan working with exceptional precision. "This is something special, Jasper," Michael said, his voice hushed with wonder. "This isn't just some old junk." For a brief, tantalizing moment, Michael allowed himself to imagine that he'd discovered buried treasure, perhaps gold coins or valuable jewelry hidden by previous landowners. Such a find could potentially solve his financial problems overnight. But the unique appearance and obvious antiquity of the box suggested something potentially more significant than simple monetary value. Michael carried the box back to the farmhouse, Jasper trotting proudly beside him, as if fully aware of his role in the discovery. In the kitchen, Michael gently placed the box on a clean towel spread across the table and began the delicate process of cleaning it more thoroughly with a soft brush and minimal water. As layers of soil were carefully removed, the extraordinary nature of the artifact became increasingly apparent. The box was made of what appeared to be bronze or a similar alloy, but with a distinctive coloration that suggested unusual composition. The surface was covered with intricate engravings depicting human figures in unfamiliar clothing, animals both recognizable and strangely stylized, and complex geometric patterns that seemed to tell a story Michael couldn't decipher. The most remarkable feature was the locking mechanism, an intricate system of sliding panels and recessed buttons that appeared designed to open only when manipulated in a specific sequence. Michael studied it carefully, but resisted the temptation to force it open, sensing that damaging such an unusual artifact would be a terrible mistake. After nearly an hour of gentle cleaning and examination, Michael reached for his phone and called the history department at Millfield Community College, where his cousin Sarah taught American history. If anyone would know who to contact about such a discovery, it would be her. "Sarah, it's Michael," he said when she answered. "I need your advice about something unusual I just found while plowing the south field." "Farm equipment from your grandfather's day?" she asked, familiar with the random mechanical parts that occasionally surfaced on old family farms. "No, nothing like that," Michael replied. "It's some kind of decorative metal box, old, really old, I think. It has engravings and a strange locking system. I've never seen anything like it." There was a moment of silence before Sarah responded, her academic interest clearly piqued. "Can you send me some photos?" Michael quickly took several detailed pictures of the box from multiple angles and texted them to her. The response was almost immediate. His phone rang less than a minute after sending the images. "Michael," Sarah's voice had changed completely, now carrying an unmistakable edge of excitement. "Where exactly did you find this?" "Near the center of the south field, maybe 50 yards from Maxwell Creek," he answered, surprised by her intensity. "Jasper's been trying to dig there for days." "Don't touch it anymore," she instructed firmly. "Don't try to open it. I'm going to make a call to Dr. Eleanor Winters at the State Museum. She specializes in pre-Columbian artifacts." "Pre-Columbian?" Michael echoed, confused. "You think this thing is that old?" "I'm not qualified to make that determination," Sarah replied carefully, "but those engravings look remarkably similar to Mississippian cultural artifacts from around 1200 CE. If I'm right, and we need an expert to confirm this, what you've found could be extremely significant." The implication took a moment to sink in. Michael had assumed the box might be from the colonial era or perhaps the early 19th century. The suggestion that it could be nearly 1,000 years old seemed almost impossible. "I'll call you back within the hour," Sarah promised, before ending the call. While waiting, Michael sat at his kitchen table, staring at the mysterious box with newfound wonder. Jasper settled contentedly at his feet, occasionally glancing up at the object as if pleased with his role in its discovery. The financial worries that had dominated Michael's thoughts just hours earlier temporarily receded, replaced by curiosity about how such an artifact had come to be buried in his family's field. True to her word, Sarah called back 40 minutes later, her voice barely containing her excitement. Michael, Dr. Winters, looked at the photos and nearly dropped her phone. "She's assembling a team to come out to your farm immediately. They should arrive within a few hours." "That was fast," Michael remarked, surprised by the urgency. "Because what you found might be extraordinary," Sarah explained. "Those engravings match a very specific artistic tradition associated with a mysterious Mississippian outpost that's long been rumored to have existed in western New York, but no concrete evidence has ever been found. If this is authentic, and Dr. Winters thinks it is, it could rewrite our understanding of indigenous trade networks and cultural expansion." "On our farm?" Michael asked incredulously. "Wouldn't someone in my family have found evidence before now?" "Not necessarily," Sarah explained. "Agricultural practices have changed dramatically in recent decades. Your great-grandfather's plowing wouldn't have gone nearly as deep as modern equipment. Plus, that south field borders Maxwell Creek, which would have been a logical settlement, location for people following waterways." After ending the call, Michael found himself looking at his family farm with new eyes. The land he had always known as the Harrington farm had clearly held secrets that predated his family's arrival by centuries. The fields he had walked thousands of times suddenly seemed alive with hidden history, stories buried beneath the soil he had taken for granted. By early afternoon, a caravan of vehicles turned into his driveway. 2 official state museum vans, a university research truck, and several personal vehicles. Michael watched from his porch as a diverse group of individuals emerged, carrying specialized equipment and moving with the focused energy of professionals responding to a significant event. A tall woman with silver-streaked black hair pulled into a practical bun approached the house first, extending her hand as she introduced herself. "Mr. Harrington, I'm Dr. Eleanor Winters, curator of Indigenous Collections at the State Museum. Thank you for reporting your find so responsibly. Many people would have attempted to open the box or clean it improperly." Michael shook her hand, somewhat overwhelmed by the sudden transformation of his quiet farm into a hive of academic activity. "I figured someone should look at it before I did anything. I never expected all this." Dr. Winters smiled. "Based on the photographs, what you've discovered could be one of the most significant archaeological finds in this region in decades. We needed to respond accordingly." She introduced her team: archaeologists, conservators, imaging specialists, and a cultural liaison from the Seneca Nation who would ensure proper protocols were followed if the artifact proved to be of indigenous origin. "May we see the box?" Dr. Winters asked. Michael led them into his kitchen, where the artifact still rested on the table. The reaction from the assembled experts was immediate and dramatic. A collective intake of breath, followed by an almost reverent silence as they gathered around the table. "Extraordinary," Dr. Winters whispered, pulling on thin latex gloves before gently rotating the box for a better view of its engravings. "The craftsmanship is exceptional, and the iconography is consistent with late Mississippian artistic traditions, but with unique elements I've never seen documented." One of the conservators carefully photographed the box from multiple angles, while another set up specialized scanning equipment. A third expert delicately took material samples from the residual, soil still clinging to crevices in the design. "Mr. Harrington, would you show us exactly where this was found?" Dr. Winters asked. "The context of discovery is extremely important for proper documentation." Michael led a subset of the team to the south field, while others remained at the farmhouse to continue examining the box. Jasper accompanied them, his demeanor unusually dignified, as if understanding the importance of the occasion. At the plowing site, the archaeologists carefully marked the precise location with GPS coordinates and began a systematic survey of the surrounding area. "We'll need to conduct a proper archaeological assessment of this section of your property," Dr. Winters explained. "Based on this discovery, there's high probability that additional artifacts or even structural remains may be present below the surface." "What does that mean for my farm operations?" Michael asked, suddenly concerned about how this might impact his already precarious financial situation. Dr. Winters regarded him thoughtfully. "It would mean temporary restrictions on agricultural activity in specific areas while we conduct proper surveys and possible excavations." Noticing his expression, she added, "There would be compensation for any disruption to your farming, Mr. Harrington." Additionally, significant archaeological finds often qualify for various preservation grants and historical designations that can be financially beneficial to landowners. As they walked back toward the farmhouse, one of the archaeologists jogged up to join them, his expression animated with excitement. "Dr. Winters, the ground-penetrating radar is showing multiple anomalies within a 50-yard radius of the discovery site. Definitely not natural formations. They appear to be regularly spaced and consistent with potential structural foundations." The information clearly excited Dr. Winters, though she maintained professional composure. "Let's complete the preliminary survey before drawing conclusions, but make sure the imaging team documents everything thoroughly." Back at the farmhouse, the atmosphere had transformed from careful examination to barely contained excitement. The conservation team had been using specialized equipment to examine the box without opening it, including a type of imaging technology that could visualize the contents without disturbing the artifact. "Mr. Harrington," one of the specialists said as they returned, "we've completed preliminary imaging of the interior contents. Would you like to be the first to see what's inside the box you discovered?" Michael nodded, suddenly feeling a strange connection to this mysterious object that had lain hidden beneath his family's land for centuries. The specialist turned her laptop screen to show him a remarkably clear three-dimensional rendering of the box's contents. Inside were dozens of small objects, what appeared to be intricately carved figurines, several disc-shaped items with complex engravings, and most surprisingly, a collection of small tools crafted from materials that gleamed brightly even. "In the scanned image, are those gold?" Michael asked, pointing to the gleaming tools. "Not gold," Dr. Winters corrected, her voice hushed with wonder. Based on the density readings and visual characteristics, they appear to be copper, but copper of exceptional purity, worked with a level of sophistication we've rarely seen in North American artifacts from this period. One of her colleagues, a specialist in metallurgy, nodded in agreement. The preliminary analysis suggests these may be ceremonial tools crafted from what's called float copper, naturally occurring pure copper that was highly prized and traded across vast distances. The Great Lakes region was one of the few sources of such material in ancient North America. As the experts continued their analysis, the significance of Michael's discovery became increasingly apparent. What he had uncovered wasn't simply an interesting historical curiosity, it was potentially a transformative archaeological find that could reshape understanding of pre-Columbian trade networks and cultural connections in the Northeast. "Mr. Harrington," Dr. Winters said finally, turning from a hushed conversation with several colleagues, "based on our preliminary assessment, what you've discovered appears to be a ceremonial repository of the highest cultural and historical significance, likely dating from approximately 1100 to 1200 CE. The craftsmanship, materials, and iconography suggest connections to Mississippian cultural traditions that were previously undocumented this far northeast." She paused, allowing the information to sink in before continuing. "With your permission, we would like to transport the box to our conservation laboratory for proper preservation and study. Additionally, we would like to conduct a systematic archaeological survey of the discovery area, which would require temporary restrictions on agricultural use of that specific section of your property." Michael considered the request, his mind still processing the extraordinary turn of events. Just hours earlier, he had been a struggling farmer facing foreclosure. Now he stood in his kitchen, surrounded by experts who viewed his land not as failing acreage, but as a potential archaeological treasure trove. "What exactly would this mean for my farm going forward?" he asked carefully. Dr. Winters gestured for him to join her at the kitchen table, her manner shifting from scientific excitement to practical consideration. "Mr. Harrington, discoveries of this significance typically initiate several processes. First, your property, or at least the relevant portions of it, would likely be designated as a site of historical importance. This designation comes with certain restrictions, but also significant benefits." She outlined how archaeological sites often qualified for various conservation easements, tax benefits, and preservation grants that could provide financial stability, while maintaining private ownership. Additionally, she explained that compensation would be provided for any areas temporarily removed from agricultural production during the archaeological assessment. "Beyond the immediate financial considerations," she continued, "sites of extraordinary historical significance often become educational resources and even tourism destinations, creating new economic opportunities for landowners willing to partner in their preservation and presentation." As the conversation continued, Michael began to see possibilities he hadn't considered before. Ways this unexpected discovery might not only save his family farm, but transform it into something that honored both his family's agricultural legacy and the much older cultural heritage that had just been revealed. By evening, the initial documentation of the box and preliminary survey of the discovery site had been completed. The team prepared to transport the artifact to the state museum's conservation laboratory, where it would undergo more detailed analysis and proper preservation treatment. Before they departed, Dr. Winters approached Michael with formal paperwork acknowledging his discovery and outlining the next steps in the process. "We'll be in touch tomorrow to schedule the comprehensive archaeological survey," she explained. "In the meantime, our legal team will prepare documentation regarding site designation and landowner compensation for your review." As the caravan of vehicles departed down his driveway, Michael stood on his porch, with Jasper leaning against his leg, both watching as the sun set over fields that suddenly held new meaning. The land that had been in his family for 4 generations had been sustaining human communities for nearly 1,000 years before the first Harrington ever set foot on it. The financial worries that had seemed so crushing that morning hadn't disappeared, but they had been transformed by this unexpected development. For the first time in years, Michael felt something beyond anxiety when he looked at his farm, a spark of possibility, of purpose, beyond mere survival. Inside, he settled at his kitchen table, the same table where he had spent countless nights, agonizing over bills and bank notices. Tonight, however, he opened his laptop to research Mississippian culture and archaeological site preservation, eager to understand more about the hidden history of his land and what it might mean for its future. Jasper curled contentedly at his feet, occasionally glancing up with what Michael could have sworn was satisfaction. The old dog had somehow known what lay beneath the soil of the South Field, had persistently tried to reveal it, and had ultimately succeeded in changing everything. "You knew all along, didn't you, boy?" Michael murmured, reaching down to scratch behind Jasper's ears. The dog sighed contentedly in response, his mission mysteriously accomplished. As midnight approached, Michael finally closed his laptop, his mind buzzing with new information and possibilities. Tomorrow would bring more experts, more assessments, and the beginning of what Dr. Winters had called a comprehensive re-evaluation of regional archaeological understanding. For Michael Harrington, it would also bring something he hadn't dared hope for just one day earlier, a new path forward for the family farm. One that might preserve not just his family's legacy, but a much older and more profound connection to the land he had always loved. He glanced at the foreclosure notices still stacked on the corner of his desk, their power to terrify him suddenly diminished. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would be different from the desperate struggle he had faced that morning. Something extraordinary had been hiding beneath his fields all along, waiting for the right moment to emerge. As Michael finally prepared for bed, exhausted but too excited to feel it, he realized that in uncovering the ancient box, he had discovered something else as well. Hope, buried like treasure beneath the weight of years, suddenly unearthed and gleaming with possibility. Michael awoke before his alarm the next morning, his mind already racing with thoughts of the previous day's extraordinary events. For the first time in years, he hadn't spent the pre-dawn hours calculating financial scenarios or worrying about impending bank deadlines. Instead, his thoughts had been consumed by images of ancient craftsmen creating the mysterious box that had lain hidden beneath his fields for centuries. Jasper, sensing his master's unusual energy, abandoned his customary morning laziness and followed Michael downstairs with unexpected vigor. The old dog's renewed vitality seemed directly connected to the discovery, as if completing his mission had reinvigorated him. "You've earned extra breakfast today, old friend," Michael told him, adding an additional scoop of kibble to Jasper's bowl. The border collie's tail wagged appreciatively before he settled into his meal. Over his own breakfast of strong coffee and toast, Michael reviewed the information Dr. Winters had provided before departing. The archaeological team would return at 9 a.m. to begin a comprehensive survey of the South Field and surrounding areas. They would use ground-penetrating radar, magnetometry, and other non-invasive techniques to map potential subsurface features before determining locations for possible excavation. Michael had already signed preliminary paperwork granting permission for the survey while retaining his rights as the property owner. Dr. Winters had been refreshingly transparent about both the scientific importance of his discovery and his legal rights throughout the process, As he waited for the archaeological team to arrive, Michael found himself drawn back to the spot where he'd discovered the box. The morning sun cast long shadows across the partially ploughed field, highlighting the contours of the land in ways he'd never fully appreciated before. How many mornings had he worked this soil without realizing what lay beneath? How many generations of Harringtons had unknowingly walked above the buried remnants of a much older community? Standing in the quiet morning light, Michael felt a profound shift in his relationship with the land. What he had always valued primarily as agricultural real estate, acres to be planted, harvested, and converted into financial sustenance, now revealed itself as something far more complex. This wasn't just Harrington land. It was ground that had witnessed centuries of human history, had held secrets that predated European settlement by many hundreds of years. A vehicle turning into his driveway interrupted his contemplation. To his surprise, it wasn't one of the museum vans, but his cousin Sarah's modest sedan. She emerged looking both excited and slightly disheveled, as if she'd dressed in a hurry. "I couldn't sleep," she admitted as she approached, her academic composure temporarily replaced by unrestrained enthusiasm. "After I got home last night, I spent hours researching potential Mississippian outposts in this region. Michael, do you realize what's happening here?" He smiled at her excitement. "I'm starting to get some idea. Dr. Winters seemed to think it was significant." Sarah laughed. "Significant? That's the understatement of the century. The existence of Mississippian cultural artifacts this far northeast has been debated for decades with only circumstantial evidence. What you found could represent a missing link in our understanding of pre-Columbian trade networks across the entire continent." She fell into step beside him as they walked the perimeter of the South Field, her historian's perspective bringing new dimensions to land Michael had known all his life. "This location makes perfect sense," she continued, gesturing toward Maxwell. "Greek. Indigenous communities typically establish settlements along waterways, particularly at points where smaller tributaries joined larger river systems. The creek connects to the river network that eventually reaches the Great Lakes. It would have been a natural route for trade and cultural exchange." "But why would Mississippian people come this far north?" Michael asked. "I thought their civilization was centered around the Mississippi River Valley." "That's exactly what makes this discovery so potentially revolutionary," Sarah explained. "The conventional understanding is that Mississippian influence extended primarily through the Mississippi and Ohio River valleys. Confirmed archaeological evidence this far northeast would suggest either a much wider trade network than previously documented, or possibly an outpost specifically established to access Great Lakes resources like copper." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Winters and her team, now expanded to include additional specialists and equipment. The archaeological activity soon transformed the quiet farm into a hive of methodical scientific investigation. Teams deployed across the South Field with various instruments, establishing a precise grid system for documentation and gradually building a subsurface map of the area surrounding the discovery site. Dr. Winters approached Michael and Sarah, tablet in hand, her professional demeanor unable to completely mask her excitement. "Mr. Harrington, the preliminary survey results are remarkable. We've identified what appears to be a substantial settlement pattern beneath your field. Post holes suggesting structures, possible ceremonial areas, and distinct activity zones consistent with a permanent or semi-permanent community." She turned the tablet to show them a composite image generated from the ground-penetrating radar data, ghostly outlines beneath the soil that clearly indicated deliberate, organized human construction. Based on the distribution and arrangement of these features, we're looking at what may have been a significant outpost, not just a temporary camp or trading post, but an established community that existed here for an extended period. How many people would have lived here? Michael asked, trying to visualize his familiar farm terrain occupied by an ancient society. It's too early for precise estimates, Dr. Winters cautioned, but the preliminary data suggests a community of perhaps 100 to 200 individuals at its peak. Not a major city by Mississippian standards, but a substantial and likely important outpost, this far from their core territories. As the morning progressed, the survey revealed increasingly compelling evidence of the ancient community that had once thrived on what would later become Harrington farmland. The archaeological team identified potential workshop areas, living spaces, and most intriguingly, what appeared to be a central ceremonial structure built on a small, artificially constructed rise that had been nearly flattened by centuries of farming. By mid-afternoon, Dr. Winters called a meeting with Michael to discuss the preliminary findings and next steps. They gathered under the shade of the ancient maple trees near the farmhouse. The contrast between the trees planted by Michael's father and the much older human history now being uncovered, creating a striking temporal perspective. Mr. Harrington, Dr. Winters began, based on today's survey, we'd like to propose a phased archaeological investigation of the site. This would involve limited test excavations in specific areas identified through our non-invasive survey, followed by more extensive excavation if warranted by initial findings. She presented a detailed map showing proposed excavation areas and a timeline extending over several months. We understand this would impact your agricultural use of this portion of your property, so we've prepared an initial compensation proposal based on standard rates for archaeological access to private land. The document she handed Michael outlined a monthly payment structure that nearly took his breath away. The proposed compensation for temporary archaeological use of approximately 15 acres would cover his mortgage payments with money to spare. And this was just the beginning of potential financial arrangements if the site proved as significant as preliminary evidence suggested. Additionally, Dr. Winters continued, given the apparent significance of this discovery, I've initiated discussion with several foundations that specialize in supporting archaeological preservation on private land. There are substantial grants available for landowners who partner in preserving important historical sites while maintaining ownership and appropriate use of their property. Michael studied the documents, a strange mixture of emotions washing over him. The immediate financial relief was undeniable. These arrangements would forestall the looming foreclosure and provide stability he hadn't dared hope for just days earlier. Yet there was something more profound happening, something that transcended mere financial salvation. His relationship with this land was transforming before his eyes, deepening in ways he couldn't have anticipated. How would this affect my farming operations long-term? He asked, thinking practically even as his mind grappled with larger implications. That would largely depend on what we find and on your preferences as the landowner, Dr. Winters explained. In similar cases, we've established arrangements where portions of properties are preserved for their archaeological significance, while other areas continue in agricultural use. Many landowners find that the combination of preservation grants, educational program income, and focused agriculture actually improves their financial stability while allowing them to maintain their connection to the land. As the archaeological team continued their survey work, local media began arriving at the farm, alerted to the potential significance of the discovery. Dr. Winters had anticipated this interest and provided Michael with guidance on handling press inquiries, emphasizing the preliminary nature of the findings while acknowledging the potentially groundbreaking implications. The first reporter to arrive was Elena Martinez from the Millfield Chronicle, a respected local journalist known for her thoughtful coverage of community issues. Michael had known Elena for years. She had previously written about the challenges facing small family farms in the region, including a sympathetic profile of the Harrington farm's struggle against industrial agriculture. "Michael," she greeted him warmly, "when I heard about an archaeological discovery at your farm, I never imagined something of this magnitude. Dr. Winters tells me this could rewrite historical understanding of pre-Columbian cultural exchange in the Northeast." Michael appreciated her direct approach. "It's still sinking in, Elena. Yesterday, I was just trying to prepare my fields for planting. Today, I'm learning that my family's farm might be one of the most important archaeological sites in the region." She conducted a thorough interview, asking thoughtful questions about both the discovery itself and how it might impact his farming operation. Unlike some of the reporters who arrived later, Elena seemed to understand that this wasn't just an archaeological story. It was about a family farm at a crossroads, suddenly presented with an unexpected new path forward. By evening, the preliminary survey had been completed, and the archaeological team prepared to depart, with plans to return the following day to begin test excavations. Before leaving, Dr. Winters provided Michael with updates on the artifact he had discovered. "The conservation team has completed the initial preservation work on the box," she explained, showing him photographs of the now cleaned artifact. Without its covering of soil, the craftsmanship was even more impressive. Intricate engravings depicting human figures, animals, celestial symbols, and geometric patterns covered nearly every surface. "We've also completed advanced imaging of the contents without opening the box," she continued, showing him enhanced 3D renderings that revealed dozens of objects packed carefully inside, ceremonial tools, figurines, and various items whose purpose remained mysterious. "When will it be opened?" Michael asked, fascinated by the glimpses of the box's contents. "We're consulting with cultural experts and preparing specialized equipment for the opening, which we've scheduled for next week," Dr. Winters explained. "As the discoverer, you'll be invited to be present for this significant moment." After the archaeological team departed, Michael found himself alone on his porch with Jasper, watching as the setting sun painted his fields with golden light. The farm looked outwardly unchanged, the same rolling acres his family had worked for generations. Yet everything had fundamentally shifted. Beneath the familiar surface lay an unexpected connection to the distant past, a legacy far older than the Harrington name. His phone rang, interrupting his contemplation. The screen displayed Heartland Agricultural Bank, the very institution whose foreclosure notices had haunted him for months. With a deep breath, Michael answered, expecting another difficult conversation about his overdue payments. "Mr. Harrington," the familiar voice of Regional Manager Thomas Wilson greeted him. "I understand congratulations are in order. Your farm has become quite newsworthy today." "News travels fast," Michael replied cautiously. "Indeed it does. I'm calling because this development obviously affects our ongoing discussions about your mortgage situation. We'd like to schedule a meeting to explore how these changed circumstances might allow for restructuring your current obligations." The conversation that followed represented a dramatic shift from their previous interactions. Rather than pressure and deadlines, Wilson spoke of flexibility, partnership, and the bank's desire to support historically significant properties in the community. The underlying message was clear. Foreclosing on a farm that had suddenly become archaeologically important would be a public relations disaster for the bank. They were now eager to find accommodating solutions. After ending the call, Michael couldn't help but laugh at the ironic turn of events. For years, he had struggled against faceless financial institutions that viewed his family legacy as nothing more than collateral on a troubled loan. Now, the discovery of a much older legacy beneath his fields had suddenly transformed his bargaining position. The bank that had been preparing to take his land was now practically begging to renegotiate terms in his favor. That evening, several of Michael's neighbors stopped by, drawn by the news reports and genuine concern about what the discovery might mean for one of the oldest farming families in the community, instead of the isolated struggle he had endured. For years, Michael found himself surrounded by support and shared excitement. Earl Peterson, whose dairy farm bordered the northern edge of the Harrington property, brought homemade apple pie from his wife and stayed for coffee. At 73, Earl represented an older generation of farmers who had witnessed dramatic changes in rural America. "In all my years," Earl remarked, shaking his head in wonder, "I never imagined something like this happening in our little community. Ancient civilization right under our feet, and nobody knew it until your dog started digging." Jasper, hearing himself referenced, thumped his tail against the floor from his position near Michael's chair. "Makes you think, doesn't it?" Earl continued, his weathered face thoughtful. "We work this land, worry about rainfall and crop prices and bank loans, thinking we understand our place in the world. Then something like this comes along and reminds us we're just the latest in a long line of people who've called this ground home." His words resonated deeply with Michael, articulating the perspective shift he'd been experiencing since the moment the plow struck the ancient box. The other visitors expressed similar sentiments, their conversation extending late into the evening as they helped Michael process the implications of his discovery. When he finally retired to bed, exhausted but unable to quiet his mind, Michael found himself reaching for an old family album he hadn't opened in years. By the dim light of his bedside lamp, he paged through photographs of Harringtons working, the same fields across decades. His father on the very tractor Michael still used, his grandfather with horse-drawn equipment before that, and faded sepia images of his great-grandfather clearing stones from newly claimed farmland. Each generation had known the land in a slightly different way, had faced unique challenges in maintaining the family legacy. Now Michael found himself at a juncture his ancestors could never have imagined, custodian not just of the Harrington farming tradition, but of a much older heritage that had lain hidden beneath their collective feet for centuries. The realization brought a profound sense of responsibility, but also a strange comfort. The land had sustained human communities long before his family arrived, and would likely continue long after his own stewardship ended. His role was temporary, but meaningful, a bridge between past and future, with obligations to both. The next morning dawned clear and cool, perfect conditions for the archaeological team to begin their test excavations. They arrived early, equipment ready and permission secured through the expedited process Dr. Winters had initiated. Michael had already designated an area of the farmhouse as a field laboratory, where artifacts could be initially processed and documented before transport to more specialized facilities. The excavation began with careful removal of the topsoil in 3 small test units, each 5 feet square, positioned based on the previous day's survey results. Michael observed the process with fascination, impressed by the methodical precision of the archaeologists as they documented every aspect of their work, photographing, measuring, and recording details that would have seemed insignificant to untrained eyes. By mid-morning, the first test unit had yielded tangible evidence of the ancient community: fragments of pottery with distinctive decorative patterns, stone tools crafted with remarkable skill, and most exciting to the archaeological team, clear post molds indicating structural supports for buildings that had stood centuries earlier. "These aren't random finds, Mr. Harrington," Dr. Winters explained as she showed him the carefully excavated features. "What we're seeing is consistent with a well-established community with specialized craft production, permanent architecture, and cultural patterns directly connected to Mississippian traditions. The distinctive pottery decoration in particular shows clear stylistic connections to major Mississippian centers much further south and west." As the careful excavation continued, each hour seemed to bring new discoveries that added detail to the emerging picture of the ancient settlement. By afternoon, the team had recovered dozens of artifacts and documented structural patterns that suggested a planned community rather than a temporary encampment. Most significant was the discovery of a small copper pendant, expertly crafted, and bearing symbols nearly identical to those on the box Michael had discovered. The pendant emerged from the second test unit, carefully extracted and immediately photographed in place before being gently lifted from soil that had protected it for nearly a millennium. "This is extraordinary," Dr. Winters said quietly as she examined the pendant. "The workmanship is exceptional, and the symbolic language matches known Mississippian iconography associated with elite status. This wasn't just any outpost. It appears to have been a community with significant connections to the ceremonial and political centers of Mississippian culture." The copper itself was of particular interest to the archaeological team. Preliminary analysis suggested it originated from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, one of the few sources of naturally pure copper in ancient North America. Its presence provided compelling evidence for long-distance trade networks stretching across what would now be multiple states. As work progressed, Dr. Winters took Michael aside to discuss an unexpected development. Based on the quality and significance of what we're finding, several major research institutions have expressed interest in supporting a more comprehensive investigation. The National Science Foundation has indicated willingness to fast-track a substantial grant application, and 2 major universities have reached out about research partnerships. She showed him proposals that outlined potential funding that dwarfed the initial compensation arrangement. This level of support would allow for a much more comprehensive approach, including specialized analyses, expanded excavation areas, and most importantly, from your perspective, more substantial landowner compensation and preservation support. The financial implications were staggering. The proposed arrangements would not only resolve Michael's immediate crisis, but potentially provide long-term stability far beyond what farming alone had offered in recent years. Yet, as he reviewed the documents, Michael found himself focused less on the financial aspects and more on the educational and preservation components outlined in the proposals. One university had included plans for a summer field school that would bring students to learn archaeological techniques while contributing to the investigation. Another proposed development of educational programs for local schools, using the site to teach about indigenous history and cultural heritage. The museum had outlined a potential interpretive center that would tell the story of both the ancient community and the agricultural history of the Harrington farm, weaving together the multiple layers of human connection to this specific landscape. "What do you think, Mr. Harrington?" Dr. Winters asked, watching his expression as he reviewed the proposals. "It's overwhelming," he admitted. "Yesterday I was worried about losing the farm. Today I'm considering partnerships with major universities and museums. Take some time to consider the options," she advised. "These are significant decisions about the future of your property. But I will say that in my experience, landowners who embrace the historical significance of their property often find it adds dimensions to their connection with the land rather than diminishing it." As the excavation team continued their careful work, Michael walked to the far edge of the south field where he could observe the activity from a distance. Jasper accompanied him, the old dog seemingly content to watch the unfolding discovery he had helped initiate. From this vantage point, Michael could see both the archaeologists meticulously documenting the ancient community and, in the distance, the red barn his great-grandfather had built. The juxtaposition of timeframes, a 1,000-year-old settlement and his family's 130-year presence, provided a perspective that felt both humbling and somehow reassuring. He had always defined himself as a fourth-generation farmer, Taking pride in continuing the Harrington agricultural tradition, now he found himself contemplating a new identity, custodian of a much longer human story, responsible for preserving and sharing a heritage that extended far beyond his family's arrival on this land. The remainder of the day brought a steady stream of discoveries from the test excavations, each artifact and feature adding detail to the picture of the ancient community. By evening, the archaeological team had assembled compelling evidence that Michael's farm contained the remains of a significant Mississippian outpost, likely established to facilitate trade between the major centers to the south and the valuable resources of the Great Lakes region. As the team packed up their equipment for the day, Dr. Winters provided Michael with an updated assessment. "What we've found exceeds our initial expectations," she explained. "The settlement appears to have been larger and more complex than we initially estimated, with evidence of specialized craft production, ceremonial activities, and long-distance trade connections." She showed him photographs of the day's most significant finds: distinctive pottery fragments, specialized tools, and most intriguingly, what appeared to be fragments of a ceremonial mask crafted from shell that would have originated hundreds of miles away on the Atlantic coast. "Based on these findings, I've recommended expedited consideration for National Historic Landmark status," she continued, "which would make additional preservation resources available while ensuring appropriate protections for the site." After the archaeological team departed, promising to return the following day to continue their work, Michael found himself once again on his porch as twilight settled over the farm. The familiar landscape now held new meaning, layered with histories both known and still being discovered. His phone buzzed with messages from friends and family who had seen news reports about the discovery. The story had spread far beyond the local media, picked up by regional outlets, and even gaining mention in national archaeological publications. His cousin Sarah had forwarded an article from a major university's anthropology department blog that described the Harrington farm discovery as potentially revolutionary for our understanding of Mississippian cultural expansion. As darkness fell, Michael remained on the porch, contemplating the extraordinary turn his life had taken. Just 2 days earlier, he had been a struggling farmer facing imminent foreclosure, defined primarily by his financial failures despite years of hard work and dedication. Now he found himself at the center of archaeological excitement, his land suddenly valuable for reasons completely unrelated to its agricultural output. Yet amidst all the external changes, the archaeological activity, media attention, and financial opportunities, Michael recognized that the most significant transformation was happening within himself. His relationship with this land, which had been primarily economic, despite his emotional attachment to his family legacy, was evolving into something more complex and ultimately more meaningful. The ground beneath his feet had been home to human communities for 1,000 years before the first Harrington claimed ownership. The ancient people who had created the ceremonial box had valued this specific landscape for reasons Michael was only beginning to understand: its relationship to waterways, natural resources, and perhaps spiritual significance that transcended mere practical concerns. His own family had added another layer of human connection, working the soil for generations and building the modest structures that defined the modern farm. Each Harrington had faced challenges unique to their time: his great-grandfather clearing virgin forest, his grandfather weathering the Great Depression, his father navigating the farm crisis of the 1980s. Now, Michael found himself writing an unexpected new chapter in that ongoing story. As stars appeared in the clear night sky, Michael felt a strange sense of connection, not just to his direct ancestors, but to all those who had called this land home across the centuries. The ancient craftsmen who had created the ceremonial box, the community that had lived and worked here long before European settlement, the generations of Harringtons who had passed the farm from father to son. All were linked in a continuous human relationship with this specific piece of earth. Jasper stirred from his resting place near Michael's chair, rising stiffly to press against his master's leg, as if sensing his contemplative mood. Michael absently stroked the dog's head, grateful for the simple, loyal presence that had, against all odds, initiated this transformative discovery. "You've changed everything, old friend," he murmured. The border collie looked up at him with knowing eyes, seemingly content with his role in uncovering secrets that had waited patiently beneath the soil for centuries. As he finally retired to bed, Michael found himself looking forward to the morning. With an anticipation he hadn't felt in years, tomorrow would bring more discoveries, more decisions about the future of the farm, more adjustments to his understanding of his place in the ongoing human story of this land. For the first time in too long, he faced these prospects not with dread, but with genuine curiosity and even excitement. The financial pressures that had defined his existence hadn't magically disappeared, but they had been transformed from insurmountable obstacles into manageable challenges. More importantly, his sense of purpose had expanded beyond mere survival. The unexpected discovery had revealed possibilities for serving as a bridge between past and future, preserving multiple layers of history while creating something sustainable for generations yet to come. As sleep finally claimed him, Michael's last conscious thought was of the ancient craftsman who had created the ceremonial box, carefully placing it in the ground for reasons modern archaeologists could only theorize about. Had they somehow intended for it to be found centuries later, or had they simply been protecting something precious, never imagining that it would one day emerge to change the life of a farmer not yet born, struggling to maintain his own connection to the same beloved soil? Either way, the box had served its purpose, not just as a repository for ancient treasures, but as a messenger across time, connecting human communities separated by centuries, but united by their relationship with a specific landscape that had sustained them all. The morning of the box opening dawned, with an ethereal mist hanging over the Harrington farm, wisps of fog curling through the ancient maple trees and obscuring the boundaries between field and forest. Michael found the atmospheric conditions strangely appropriate, a visual reminder of how the clear divisions between past and present, between known and unknown, had blurred since his discovery 1 week earlier. The ceremonial box that had remained sealed for nearly a millennium would finally reveal its full contents today. After careful conservation work and extensive imaging, Dr. Winters and her team had determined that the artifact was stable enough to be opened safely using specialized techniques that would preserve both the container and its precious contents. Michael had spent the intervening days in a whirlwind of activity and adjustment. The archaeological investigation had expanded systematically across the South Field, revealing increasingly compelling evidence of the ancient community that had once thrived there. Each day brought new discoveries, distinctive pottery fragments, specialized tools crafted from materials sourced hundreds of miles away, structural patterns indicating permanent dwellings, and ceremonial spaces arranged according to astronomical alignments. The media attention had intensified as well. What had begun as local interest had expanded to regional and even national coverage as the significance of the discoveries became apparent. Michael had given interviews to archaeological journals, regional newspapers, and even a documentary crew specializing in indigenous history. He had carefully followed Dr. Winter's guidance about discussing the finds, emphasizing that proper understanding required scientific analysis rather than speculation. Most significantly, Michael's financial circumstances had undergone a dramatic transformation. The initial compensation for archaeological access had been supplemented by emergency preservation grants expedited by several historical foundations. The Heartland Agricultural Bank, now eager to be seen as a partner in preserving historical treasures rather than as the villain foreclosing on a significant archaeological site, had not only restructured his mortgage but offered favorable terms on consolidated loans that eliminated his most pressing debt. Beyond these immediate financial changes, longer-term opportunities had emerged that promised sustainable support for both the archaeological site and the continuing agricultural operation. Several universities had proposed research partnerships that would bring substantial funding and educational programs to the farm. The State Museum had presented preliminary plans for an interpretive center that would tell the interwoven stories of the ancient community and the generations of Harrington farmers who had unknowingly preserved the archaeological site beneath their fields. Through all these external changes, Michael had experienced an equally profound internal transformation. His relationship with his land had deepened immeasurably as he learned to see it through multiple historical lenses, not just as Harrington farmland, but as ground that had sustained human communities for 1,000 years, each leaving their mark in ways both visible and hidden. Now, as he prepared for the ceremonial box opening scheduled for mid-morning at the State Museum's Conservation Laboratory, Michael felt a strange sense of coming full circle. The object that had initiated these life-changing events would finally reveal its complete story, connecting him even more directly to the ancient hands that had created it and the society that had valued it enough to preserve it with such care. Jasper watched from his cushioned bed near the kitchen window as Michael dressed more formally than usual. A pressed shirt and tie that hadn't seen use since his father's funeral 3 years earlier. The old dog's health seemed to have improved. Since the discovery, his movements more sprightly and his eyes brighter, as if the completion of his mysterious mission had reinvigorated him. "You started all this, boy," Michael told him, kneeling to scratch behind the dog's ears. "Wish you could come along today, but this is a sterile laboratory environment. I'll tell you everything when I get back." Jasper's tail thumped contentedly against his cushion, his expressive eyes seeming to convey understanding beyond mere canine comprehension. The drive to the State Museum took just over an hour, the familiar rural landscape gradually giving way to suburbs, and finally the modest city centre. Michael had visited the museum occasionally during school field trips and family outings, but had never imagined entering as a guest of honor for a significant archaeological event. Dr. Winters met him at the staff entrance, bypassing the public areas to lead him through secure corridors to the conservation laboratory where the box awaited. "We've assembled a small group of specialists for this morning's procedure," she explained as they walked. "Representatives from the Cultural Heritage Committee of the Seneca Nation will be present as well, consistent with our protocols for indigenous artifacts." The laboratory itself was a large room filled with specialized equipment, bright lighting, and carefully organized workstations. At its center stood a large table with the ancient box positioned on a custom support structure, surrounded by various instruments and documentation tools. Around the table, approximately 15 people waited, conservation specialists in white lab coats, indigenous representatives in formal attire, and several academic experts Michael recognized from their previous visits to the farm. As Michael entered, the assembled specialists turned toward him with expressions ranging from professional courtesy to genuine warmth. Dr. Winters guided him to a position of honor near the table, introducing him formally to those he hadn't yet met. "Mr. Harrington's responsible reporting of this discovery has been exemplary," she told the group. "His cooperation and genuine interest in the historical significance of the find represents the ideal partnership between private landowners and the archaeological community." Michael nodded acknowledgement of the introduction, slightly uncomfortable with being the center of attention, yet also proud of his role in bringing this ancient treasure to light. The box itself, now thoroughly cleaned and stabilized, looked even more impressive than he remembered. The intricate engravings crisp and detailed, the craftsmanship extraordinary for any era, let alone a time when specialized metal tools would have been precious commodities. Dr. Eleanor Chen, the museum's lead conservator, explained the opening procedure they would follow. "We've completed comprehensive imaging that gives us a good understanding of the internal mechanism," she began, showing visualization scans on a nearby monitor. "The locking system is remarkably sophisticated, a series of sliding panels that must be moved in specific sequence to release the main seal." She demonstrated the sequence using a computer simulation, then continued, "We'll proceed with extreme caution, documenting each step and stabilizing components as we go. The interior environment has been sealed for approximately 900 years, so we'll be monitoring atmospheric conditions as we create the first opening." Michael watched with fascination as the team positioned specialized cameras to record the procedure from multiple angles. A cultural representative from the Seneca Nation offered a brief ceremonial acknowledgement before the technical work began, honoring the ancient craftspeople whose work was about to be revealed after centuries of darkness. With reverent precision, Dr. Chen began manipulating the locking mechanism, her gloved hands moving with the delicate confidence of someone who had spent decades preserving fragile historical treasures. The assembled specialists fell silent, the only sounds the soft click of camera shutters and the nearly imperceptible movement of metal components that had remained stationary for nearly a millennium. After approximately 20 minutes of painstaking work, a distinct click indicated the final release of the primary locking mechanism. Dr. Chen looked up, making eye contact with each person around the table before speaking. "We're ready for the initial opening," she announced quietly. "We'll proceed very slowly to minimize any potential disturbance to the contents." With exquisite care, she began to lift the lid of the ancient box, millimeter by millimeter, as specialized instruments monitored the air exchange between the sealed interior and the laboratory environment. The tension in the room was palpable as the first glimpse of the contents became visible. "Extraordinary," Dr. Chen whispered as the lid rose further, revealing the interior fully for the first time in centuries. The contents, arranged with meticulous precision, exceeded even the expectations set by the advanced imaging. Dozens of objects rested in custom-fitted recesses, lined with what appeared to be a textile that had partially deteriorated but still maintained its structural integrity. The items themselves represented an extraordinary collection of ceremonial objects, tools, ornaments, and figurines, many crafted from materials that would have been extremely precious in Mississippian society. Most striking were several figurines, carved from a distinctive reddish stone, depicting human forms in elaborate regalia. These stood upright in specially designed holders, facing inward as if participating in an eternal council meeting. Surrounding them were tools crafted from pure copper, shell ornaments from distant coastal regions, and what appeared to be ceremonial implements whose specific functions would require careful research to determine. At the center of this remarkable assemblage rested an object that drew gasps from several of the specialists. A small mask, approximately the size of a human palm, crafted from a lustrous shell material and inlaid with copper and crystal elements. The workmanship was so refined, so precise, that it seemed almost impossible to have been created with pre-industrial technology. A Mississippian shell mask of this quality. One of the academic specialists shook his head in disbelief. There are perhaps 5 comparable examples known from major ceremonial centers. Finding one this far northeast, in this context, It fundamentally changes our understanding of cultural distribution and spiritual practices. Dr. Winters turned to Michael, her professional demeanor momentarily overcome by genuine emotion. "Mr. Harrington, what you've discovered is far more significant than we initially realized. This isn't just a random collection of valuable items. It appears to be a deliberately assembled ceremonial cache, possibly related to the establishment of a new community outpost. These objects would have represented tremendous spiritual and political power in Mississippian society." Over the next several hours, the conservation team carefully documented and removed each item from the box, photographing its position, taking material samples where appropriate, and placing each artifact in specialized containment systems designed for its specific composition. The process was methodical and painstaking, treating each object with the reverence it deserved after centuries of patient waiting. As the documentation progressed, the specialists engaged in ongoing analysis and interpretation, their excitement building as patterns emerged. The arrangement of the figurines appeared to represent a specific ceremonial configuration, with positions that corresponded to celestial alignments. The tools showed evidence of specialized ritual use rather than practical application. The textiles, though fragmented, displayed weaving techniques previously undocumented in Mississippian communities this far northeast. "This is the archaeological equivalent of finding a time capsule," Dr. Winters explained to Michael as they observed the careful extraction of a particularly delicate shell ornament. But unlike modern time capsules, which are created specifically for future discovery, this collection was likely buried as part of a sacred ceremony, perhaps never intended to be seen again by human eyes. The most significant discovery came near the end of the process, as the team removed the final layer of artifacts to reveal the bottom surface of the box itself. What had appeared in imaging scans to be simple padding material turned out to be a carefully preserved hide map, painted with natural pigments and marked with symbols corresponding to waterways, settlements, and astronomical alignments. "A cosmological map," whispered Dr. Raymond Blackfox, the cultural specialist from the Seneca Nation, his voice filled with reverence. "It shows not just physical geography, but the sacred landscape as understood by the creators, the connections between earth and sky, between physical places and spiritual realms." The map depicted what was clearly the regional watershed system, with the Harrington Farm's location precisely indicated by a distinctive symbol that matched markings on the central ceremonial mask. Radiating lines connected this location to other sites, some of which corresponded to known archaeological locations, while others suggested settlements yet to be discovered. This single artifact could guide archaeological research in this region. For decades, Dr. Winters said, her professional composure momentarily overcome by the magnitude of the discovery. It provides context that connects dozens of previously isolated finds into a coherent cultural network. When the documentation was finally complete, the assembled specialists gathered for a debriefing session, with Michael included as an honored participant rather than a mere observer. Dr. Winters presented the preliminary conclusions drawn from the morning's work, emphasizing that extensive research would be required to fully understand the significance of the collection. Based on our initial assessment, we believe this assemblage represents what might be called a founding deposit, a collection of sacred objects buried during the establishment of a new community outpost around 1100–1200 CE, she explained. The presence of materials sourced from distant regions, Gulf Coast shells, Michigan copper, Ohio pipestone, indicates extensive trade networks and suggests this was not a random settlement, but a deliberately established outpost with connections to major ceremonial centers. She turned to Michael with a warm smile. Mr. Harrington, your farm appears to sit at what was once a carefully chosen location, a site selected for both practical and cosmological significance. The community that established itself there was connected to the broader Mississippian cultural sphere in ways we've never before documented in this region. The implications were profound, fundamentally challenging previous archaeological understanding of cultural boundaries and trade networks. The discovery suggested a much more extensive and sophisticated system of connection between seemingly separate indigenous societies, with symbolic and spiritual practices shared across vast distances centuries before European contact. As the meeting concluded, Dr. Winters introduced an unexpected guest, Dr. Jonathan Pierce, director of the National Museum's Indigenous Heritage Division, who had flown in specifically for this event after seeing the preliminary documentation. "Mr. Harrington," Dr. Pierce began, his deep voice carrying the gravitas of someone accustomed to dealing with historical treasures of national significance. "What you've discovered on your farm represents one of the most important archaeological finds in the Northeast in the past 50 years. The National Museum would like to propose a formal partnership for ongoing research and preservation." He outlined a comprehensive program that would provide substantial resources for the proper investigation of the site, while ensuring that the Harrington farm remained viable as an agricultural operation. Most significantly, the proposal included establishment of a permanent research and educational center on the property, creating what he described as a living laboratory where archaeology, agriculture, and education could coexist in mutual support. "We don't want to simply extract these treasures from your land," Dr. Pierce explained. "We want to help create a sustainable model that honors both the ancient heritage and your family's continuing stewardship of this special place." The formal proposal he presented included financial terms that would have seemed miraculous to Michael just weeks earlier: comprehensive debt resolution, sustainable funding for both the archaeological program and continued farming operations, and establishment of an educational trust that would ensure the land remained protected for generations to come. As Michael reviewed the documents, he was struck by the profound transformation of his circumstances. The farm that had been slipping away from him, burdened by unsustainable debt and declining agricultural returns, had revealed itself as something far more valuable than mere acreage. The land's true worth wasn't measured in bushels per acre, but in the layers of human connection it contained, stories written in soil and artifact, in ancient ceremonial deposits, and in the sweat of 4 generations of Harrington farmers. "This is extremely generous," Michael said finally, looking up from the proposal. "But I want to ensure that whatever we establish respects both the archaeological significance and the continuing agricultural tradition. This needs to remain a working farm, not just a research site." Dr. Pierce nodded with evident approval. "That's precisely our intention. The most meaningful preservation happens when historical sites remain living places. Your family's agricultural practices are what protected these archaeological treasures for decades. Continuing that tradition is an essential part of the site's story." By late afternoon, the formal proceedings at the museum had concluded, and Michael found himself driving back toward the farm with a head spinning from the day's revelations. The ancient box that Jasper had somehow sensed beneath the soil had contained not just precious artifacts, but a key that unlocked an entirely new understanding of the land he had worked all his life. As he drove the familiar route home, Michael found himself noticing landscape features with new awareness. The gentle rise where the South Field met Maxwell Creek, the distinctive rock outcropping visible from his kitchen window, the alignment of distant hills against the horizon. These weren't just random elements of scenery, but potentially significant markers in a sacred geography established centuries before his ancestors arrived. When he pulled into his driveway, the farm looked outwardly unchanged. The same weathered red barn his great-grandfather had built, the same maple trees his father had planted, the same modest farmhouse that had sheltered 4 generations of Harringtons. Yet everything had fundamentally shifted. This wasn't just Harrington land anymore. It was ground that connected human communities across 1,000 years of history. Jasper greeted him at the door with unusual energy for an elderly dog, his tail wagging vigorously as if he sensed the significance of the day's events. Michael knelt to ruffle the border collie's fur, overcome with gratitude for the faithful companion whose mysterious perception had initiated this extraordinary journey. "You were right all along, boy," he said softly. "There was something important there, something that needed to be found." That evening, as sunset painted the western sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Michael sat on his porch with a cup of coffee, watching as the archaeological team wrapped up their day's work in the south field. The methodical activity, with its careful documentation and precise measurements, seemed to honor the land in a new way, acknowledging its deeper stories, its significance beyond mere production value. His cousin Sarah joined him, bringing a stack of articles she had collected about Mississippian culture and early indigenous trade networks. Her academic enthusiasm had been energized by the discoveries, her historical expertise finding new purpose in helping Michael understand the ancient community that had once called this land home. "It's remarkable when you think about it," she said, gesturing toward the excavation site. "This farm has been continuously productive land for 1,000 years. First as part of an indigenous community connected to a vast cultural network, then as colonial farmland, and finally as the Harrington family farm. Different people, different methods, but the same soil supporting human life generation after generation." Michael nodded, struck by the continuity she described. "I've always thought of myself as continuing my family's legacy. 4 generations of Harringtons working this land. But now I realize we're just the most recent chapter in a much longer story." "And not the last chapter," Sarah added with a smile. "With this partnership, you're ensuring that both the agricultural tradition and the archaeological heritage will be preserved for future generations. That's a rare and beautiful legacy, Michael." As darkness settled over the farm, Michael remained on the porch long after Sarah had departed, contemplating the extraordinary turn his life had taken. Just weeks earlier, he had been a struggling farmer facing financial ruin, defined primarily by his failures despite years of hard work. Now he found himself at the center of archaeological excitement, custodian of a heritage far older and more significant than he could have imagined. The path forward wouldn't be simple. Balancing agricultural operations with archaeological research would require careful planning and ongoing negotiation. The public interest generated by the discoveries would bring both opportunities and challenges. The responsibility of stewarding both his family's legacy and the much older heritage now revealed would demand wisdom and patience. Yet Michael felt equal to these challenges in a way he hadn't felt capable of facing his financial problems just weeks earlier. The discovery had given him not just economic reprieve, but a deeper sense of purpose, a connection to something that transcended mere survival. The land he had always loved had revealed itself as something far more profound than simple acreage. It was a place where human communities had found meaning and sustenance for 1,000 years, a continuous thread, connecting past to present to future. As he finally rose to enter the farmhouse, Michael paused for one last look at his property, now silvered by moonlight. The archaeological excavation area was marked by carefully placed tarps and security lighting, a reminder of the ancient community, being gradually revealed. Beyond it stretched the fields his family had farmed for generations, the contours familiar to his hands and heart after decades of intimate knowledge. These weren't separate legacies, he realized, but interwoven strands of the same ongoing story. Human beings finding ways to live in meaningful relationship with a specific piece of earth. The tools and methods had changed across centuries, from ancient copper implements to his father's tractor, but the fundamental connection remained constant. People seeking sustenance, creating community, finding purpose in careful stewardship of the land beneath their feet. Jasper appeared at his side, the old dog's presence a comforting constant amidst all the changes. Michael reached down to stroke his faithful companion's head, grateful beyond words for the canine intuition that had led them both to this transformative discovery. "Come on, boy," he said softly. "Let's get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be the beginning of something new." Together, they entered the farmhouse that had sheltered Harringtons for generations, now transformed into the gateway to a future neither could have imagined. A future where ancient wisdom and modern stewardship would create something unique and precious, bridging 1,000 years of human connection to a single, special place. 3 months later, Michael stood before a gathered crowd of over 200 people, archaeologists, local community members, representatives from various indigenous nations, university students and media, for the formal dedication of the Harrington Farm, Archaeological and Agricultural Heritage Center. The summer sun shone brilliantly on the newly constructed educational facility that stood where an underutilized equipment shed had once been, its architecture thoughtfully designed to complement both the historic farm buildings and the natural landscape. Dr. Winters stood beside him at the podium, along with Dr. Pierce from the National Museum and Chief Robert Skye of the Seneca Nation Cultural Heritage Council. Behind them, carefully tended fields stretched toward the horizon, the working farm continuing its agricultural tradition even as archaeological research proceeded in specifically designated areas. "This place has always been special," Michael began, looking out at the assembled guests, "though for most of my life I didn't fully understand why. For 4 generations, my family worked this soil, following the rhythms of planting and harvest, struggling against weather and economics, finding meaning in the daily stewardship of this land." He gestured toward the south field, where controlled archaeological excavation continued under specialized canopies. What we've discovered in recent months is that this connection to the land extends much further back than the Harrington family, nearly 1,000 years to an ancient community that recognized something significant about this specific place, something worth establishing a settlement that connected them to a vast cultural network stretching across what we now call North America. The ceremonial box that had started this extraordinary journey was now the centerpiece of the Heritage Center's main exhibit, displayed in a specialized case alongside select artifacts that told the story of both the ancient community and the archaeological discovery process. The remaining items were being carefully studied, with plans for rotating exhibits that would gradually reveal the full significance of the collection. Most remarkable was how the ongoing archaeological work had transformed rather than disrupted the agricultural operation. With careful planning and generous support from the museum partnership, Michael had implemented innovative, sustainable farming practices on the portions of his land not designated for archaeological investigation. The Heritage Center included educational programs on both indigenous agricultural methods and the evolution of family farming in America, creating meaningful connections between past and present approaches to land stewardship. What we're creating here is not simply a museum or a working farm, Michael continued, but a place where different ways of knowing and valuing the land can inform each other. The ancient community that once lived here understood this landscape through a spiritual and ceremonial lens that connected them to a broader cosmological understanding. My family knew it through generations of practical agricultural knowledge passed from father to son. Modern archaeology brings yet another perspective through scientific investigation and cultural context. As he spoke, Michael noticed Jasper, sitting contentedly near the front row, the elderly dog having earned a special place of honor at all official events. Though moving more slowly now, he remained a beloved figure at the Heritage Center, with his role in the discovery prominently featured in the exhibition materials. Local children who visited the educational programs particularly loved hearing the story of the dog who had sensed ancient treasure beneath the soil. None of these perspectives is complete on its own, Michael concluded, but together they create something profound, a deeper understanding of our human relationship with the land that sustains us. That's the true treasure we've uncovered. Here, not just ancient artifacts, however precious, but a renewed awareness of how past, present, and future connect through our shared stewardship of this special place. As the formal ceremony concluded and the gathered crowd dispersed to tour the facilities and view the ongoing archaeological work, Michael found a quiet moment alone on the porch of the farmhouse that remained his home despite all the changes. Around it, from this familiar vantage point, he could see both the Heritage Center with its excited visitors and the productive fields where crops continued to grow under his care. The financial struggles that had once threatened to end the Harrington farming legacy had been resolved through the partnership with the museums and educational institutions. More importantly, the farm had found a new purpose that honored both its ancient heritage and its agricultural tradition, becoming a place where multiple forms of knowledge and value could coexist and enrich each other. Jasper joined him on the porch, the faithful companion who had initiated this extraordinary journey, now content to rest in the afternoon sun. Michael reached down to scratch behind the dog's ears, filled with gratitude for the mysterious canine intuition that had led them both to a discovery that transformed not just their circumstances, but their understanding of their place in a much larger human story. "You changed everything, old friend," Michael said softly. Jasper looked up at him with those wise, expressive eyes that had always seemed to see more than ordinary canine vision should permit. In that gaze, Michael felt a connection not just to his faithful companion, but to all those who had called this land home across the centuries. The ancient craftspeople who had created the ceremonial box, the generations of indigenous community, members who had lived in relationship with this landscape, the Harrington ancestors who had established the family farm, and now Michael himself, bridging past and future through thoughtful stewardship of a place whose significance transcended any single human lifetime. As visitors explored the Heritage Center and archaeologists carefully uncovered more evidence of the ancient community, Michael knew that the true treasure wasn't gold or artifacts or even archaeological knowledge. It was the continuing relationship between people and place, the thousand-year story of human beings finding meaning, sustenance, and purpose in careful attention to a specific piece of earth. That story continued through him now, transformed but unbroken, connecting generations. Across time, through shared stewardship of land that had always been in ways both seen and unseen, truly precious ground. 1 year after the discovery that had transformed his life, Michael Harrington stood at the edge of the newly harvested East Field, watching as the autumn sun cast long shadows across land that had sustained his family for generations. The crisp, October air carried the scent of freshly turned soil, a fragrance as familiar to him as his own heartbeat, yet now laden with deeper meaning. This wasn't just dirt, it was the keeper of stories, the preserver of human connection across centuries. The Harrington Farm Archaeological and Agricultural Heritage Centre had just celebrated its first anniversary, marking 12 extraordinary months of growth, discovery and unexpected harmony between seemingly disparate worlds. What had begun as a desperate farmer's accidental find while ploughing had blossomed into something none could have predicted, a nationally recognized centre for collaborative research that bridged indigenous history, archaeological science, and sustainable agriculture. "Beautiful evening," remarked Dr. Winters, joining Michael at the field's edge. After a year of close collaboration, their initial formal relationship had evolved into genuine friendship and mutual respect. "The heritage corn harvest looks exceptional this year." Michael nodded, gesturing toward the eastern field where traditional indigenous crop varieties had been grown, using a combination of ancient techniques and modern sustainable practices. The Three Sisters method the Seneca agricultural specialists suggested has produced better yields than I would have believed possible without chemical fertilizers. We'll have plenty for both the educational programs and commercial sales. Ruthami. Agricultural operation had been transformed as dramatically as the archaeological landscape. Rather than fighting a losing battle against industrial-scale production with conventional crops, the Harrington farm had pivoted to heritage and heirloom varieties grown using sustainable methods informed by both indigenous traditional knowledge and contemporary ecological science. The unique produce commanded premium prices at specialty markets, while the educational component created additional revenue streams that had placed the farm on solid financial footing for the first time in decades. The university research team is documenting remarkable soil health improvements already, Dr. Winters noted. The combination of traditional indigenous polyculture and modern conservation techniques is regenerating topsoil faster than conventional methods. Your great-grandfather would be impressed. Michael smiled at the thought. Each generation of Harringtons had farmed according to the best knowledge of their time, passing land and wisdom from father to son. Now that chain of knowledge had been expanded dramatically, reaching back through centuries to incorporate indigenous agricultural traditions that had sustained communities long before European settlement. They walked together along the farm's central path, a route now traveled daily by researchers, students, and visitors from across the country. The weathered red barn had been carefully restored to serve as both a working agricultural building and an exhibition space where artifacts from both the archaeological site and the Harrington family farming history were displayed side by side, telling complementary stories of human relationship with the land. The National Geographic team finished their filming yesterday, Michael mentioned. They're featuring the Heritage Center in their documentary series on indigenous trade networks. The producer said our site offers the most compelling visual narrative of cultural connection they've encountered. Dr. Winters nodded, unsurprised. What we've discovered here continues to expand our understanding of pre-Columbian cultural exchange. The artifacts from last month's excavation provide further evidence that this wasn't just an isolated outpost, but a deliberately established community with ongoing connections to major Mississippian centers hundreds of miles away. The archaeological investigation had proceeded methodically throughout the year, each careful excavation revealing new details about the ancient community that had once called this land home. The ceremonial box that had started everything had proven to be just the beginning. Subsequent discoveries had included specialized workshop areas where skilled artisans had crafted copper ornaments, a ceremonial plaza aligned with solstice, sunrise positions, and most recently, evidence of agricultural techniques specifically adapted to the local microclimate. As they approached the Heritage Center building, constructed with thoughtful architecture that honored both indigenous design principles and the practical vernacular of traditional farm structures, Michael spotted a familiar figure sitting on a bench in the late afternoon sun, Jasper, now 15 years old, had become something of a celebrity at the center. The elderly border collie held an honored position, both as the initiator of the discovery and as a beloved ambassador who greeted visitors with dignified cordiality despite his advancing years. "The guest lecturers for tomorrow's symposium have all arrived," Dr. Winters informed Michael as they entered the center's main building. The integration of indigenous agricultural knowledge with contemporary climate adaptation strategies has drawn significant academic interest. "Your keynote address on balanced stewardship is scheduled for 10 a.m. Michael nodded, still slightly amazed that he, a fourth-generation farmer who had never completed college, was now invited to address conferences and contribute to academic publications. His practical knowledge of the land, combined with his openness to indigenous perspectives and scientific research, had positioned him as a valuable bridge between different ways of knowing and working with the earth. Inside the Heritage Center, the main exhibition hall buzzed with activity as staff prepared for the next day's symposium. The ceremonial box occupied the central display case, surrounded by carefully selected artifacts that told the story of the ancient community and its connections to distant cultures. Alongside these archaeological treasures, displays highlighted the continuing agricultural tradition of the Harrington family, presenting 4 generations of farming as the most recent chapter in a 1,000-year story of human stewardship. Most powerful was the section dedicated to the cosmological map discovered at the bottom of the ceremonial box. Advanced imaging techniques had revealed details initially invisible to the naked eye, showing an intricate representation of waterways, settlements, astronomical alignments, and symbolic connections across what would now encompass several states. Physical samples taken from artifacts found at the Harrington farm had been matched with materials from sites hundreds of miles away, providing concrete evidence of the extensive trade networks depicted on the ancient map. The latest radiocarbon dating results came in this morning, Dr. Winters said, guiding Michael toward her office where they could speak privately. They confirm continuous occupation of the site from approximately 1050 to 1320 CE, with the ceremonial deposit placed around 1175. This aligns perfectly with the period when Cahokia was at its peak influence, supporting our hypothesis about the relationship between this community and the major Mississippian centers. She displayed the technical report on her computer screen, pointing out correlations between occupation periods at the Harrington site and known historical developments in the broader Mississippian world. What's most remarkable is how the community here appears to have maintained its distinctive regional character while participating in the larger cultural sphere. They weren't simply adopting Mississippian practices wholesale, but integrating them with local traditions. This nuanced understanding of cultural exchange had emerged as one of the Heritage Center's most significant contributions to archaeological knowledge. Rather than depicting pre-Columbian history as a simple narrative of dominant cultures and passive recipients, the evidence from the Harrington farm revealed a complex network of communities maintaining distinct identities while participating in far-reaching systems of trade, spiritual practice, and knowledge exchange. "It reminds me of what we're doing now," Michael observed. "Different knowledge traditions, indigenous, agricultural, scientific, each maintaining their integrity while engaging in respectful exchange. Not erasing differences, but finding ways to learn from each other." Dr. Winters smiled appreciatively. "That's precisely what makes this place so special, Michael. We're not just studying the past, we're embodying a similar ethos of exchange and mutual respect in our current work." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Chief Robert Skye of the Seneca Nation Cultural Heritage Council, whose partnership had been instrumental in developing the center's approach to both archaeological research and educational programming. The distinguished elder, whose silver hair and thoughtful demeanor conveyed natural authority, greeted them warmly. "The traditional planting demonstration area is ready for tomorrow's workshop," he informed them. "Our youth cultural group will demonstrate the planting techniques that have been passed down through generations, alongside the scientific soil analysis that confirms their effectiveness." The elders are particularly pleased to see these traditional methods validated and applied on working farmland. The chief's mention of working farmland highlighted what made the Heritage Center truly unique. Unlike conventional archaeological sites or historical museums, the Harrington farm remained a productive agricultural operation, implementing traditional indigenous techniques alongside contemporary sustainable practices on portions of the property not designated for excavation. This living laboratory approach had drawn attention from agricultural sustainability experts, providing practical demonstrations of how ancient wisdom could inform solutions to modern farming challenges. "The governor's office called this afternoon," Chief Sky continued. "They're finalizing the official designation of the Heritage Center as a state landmark, with special status acknowledging both its archaeological significance and its continuing agricultural tradition. This will secure additional protections and resources while honoring the complete historical continuum from ancient settlement through family farm to collaborative research center." This designation represented the culmination of efforts by multiple partners to ensure that the Harrington farm would be preserved not as a static historical site, but as a living, evolving place where past and present remained in productive conversation. The model they had developed, respecting archaeological treasures while maintaining working agricultural land, was being studied as a potential template for similar sites across the country. As evening approached, the Heritage Center staff departed, and the visiting scholars retired to their accommodations in the renovated farmhouse annex that now served as a comfortable residence for researchers and distinguished guests. Michael walked back to the original farmhouse that remained his private home, Jasper following at a measured pace that acknowledged his advancing years, but maintained his dignity. On the porch, where 4 generations of Harringtons had watched sunsets across the same fields, Michael settled into the handmade Adirondack chair his father had crafted decades earlier. The familiar vista, rolling fields bordered by woodlands, with Maxwell Creek winding through the lower pasture, now carried layers of meaning that transformed its simple beauty into something more profound. He knew now that the gentle rise, where the south field met the creek, had been deliberately chosen by ancient settlers for its favorable position relative to morning sunlight patterns. The distinctive rock outcropping visible from his kitchen window featured in the cosmological map as a significant marker in sacred geography. The alignment of distant hills against the horizon had guided ceremonial calendars long before European chronology divided time into the units his own ancestors had used to schedule planting and harvest. Jasper settled contentedly at Michael's feet, the old dog's presence a reminder of how this extraordinary journey had begun, with persistent digging in a specific section of field, guided by some inexplicable canine intuition that had sensed what generations of humans had missed. Michael reached down to stroke the border collie's increasingly grey muzzle, filled with gratitude for the faithful companion who had changed everything. The financial struggles that had once threatened to end the Harrington family legacy now seemed like a distant memory. The Heritage Center operation, combining archaeological research, educational programming, and specialized agricultural production, had created a sustainable economic model that promised stability for decades to come. More importantly, it had transformed the meaning of the farm itself, from a struggling agricultural operation defined primarily by financial pressure to a place of genuine significance where multiple forms of value and knowledge converged. As darkness settled over the farm, the stars emerged with particular brilliance in the clear autumn sky. Michael recognized constellations that had guided his own planting decisions based on knowledge passed down through his family. Now he also understood that the ancient community had observed these same stars, interpreting them through different cultural frameworks, but using them for similar practical purposes, to mark seasons, to time agricultural activities, to navigate both physical landscapes and spiritual understanding. The continuity struck him as profoundly moving. Generation after generation of human beings looking up at the same stars from this same piece of earth, finding meaning and guidance in patterns of light that remained constant while human cultures rose, evolved, and transformed across centuries. Different languages had named these constellations, different spiritual traditions had interpreted their significance, but the essential human activity of seeking meaning in the night sky had remained consistent across 1,000 years of history on this land. This perspective had fundamentally altered Michael's understanding of his place in the ongoing human story. He had once defined himself narrowly as a fourth-generation farmer, taking pride in continuing his family's specific agricultural legacy. Now he saw himself as part of something much larger, a 1,000-year continuum of human relationship with a particular landscape, each culture and generation contributing its unique understanding while building upon foundations laid by those who came before. The next morning dawned clear and cool, perfect weather for the symposium that would bring together indigenous knowledge keepers, agricultural specialists, climate scientists, and archaeologists for a day of collaborative exploration. Michael rose early, completing his regular farm chores before preparing for his keynote address. Despite having spoken at numerous events over the past year, he still felt a touch of nervousness when addressing academic audiences, though his practical wisdom and authentic connection to the land invariably resonated with listeners from diverse backgrounds. Jasper followed him through his morning routine, the elderly dog moving more slowly now, but maintaining his characteristic alertness. The border collie had become an integral part of the Heritage Center's story, featured in educational materials and beloved by visiting schoolchildren who delighted in hearing how a dog's mysterious perception had led to a discovery that transformed understanding of ancient cultural connections. At the Heritage Center, the staff had prepared the main hall for the symposium, arranging chairs in a circular pattern that honored indigenous traditions of council meetings while accommodating modern presentation technology. The ceremonial box and selected artifacts had been positioned prominently, reminding participants of the ancient wisdom that had initiated their gathering. As attendees began to arrive, distinguished professors in casual academic attire, indigenous elders in traditional dress, agricultural specialists in practical field clothing, Michael was struck by the unlikely community that had formed around this place. People who might never have crossed paths in conventional academic or agricultural contexts, now engaged in genuine dialogue, each bringing valuable perspective to shared questions about human relationship with the land. Dr. Winters approached. Accompanied by a distinguished visitor, Michael immediately recognized Dr. Elena Vasquez, director of the Smithsonian's Indigenous Heritage Division and one of the world's foremost authorities on pre-Columbian cultural exchange. The renowned archaeologist had traveled specifically to see the Harrington site and participate in the symposium. "Mr. Harrington," Dr. Vasquez greeted him warmly, "it's an honor to finally meet you. Your approach to integrating archaeological preservation with continuing agricultural practice represents exactly the kind of balanced stewardship we hope to encourage at heritage sites nationwide." "The honor is mine," Michael replied sincerely. "I'm just a farmer who stumbled onto something extraordinary. The collaborative model we've developed here has been a true team effort." Dr. Vasquez smiled appreciatively. "That modesty is part of what makes this place special. Too often, significant archaeological discoveries become disconnected from living communities and practical knowledge. What you've created here, this dialogue between past and present, between different ways of knowing the land, offers a template for how heritage preservation and contemporary life can enrich rather than oppose each other." As the symposium officially began, Chief Sky offered a traditional welcome and blessing, acknowledging the ancestors whose presence continued through the artifacts and knowledge being shared. The circular seating arrangement fostered a sense of equality among participants, regardless of academic credentials or institutional affiliation. When it came time for Michael's keynote address, he spoke not from a formal podium, but while standing in the center of the circle, occasionally moving to indicate specific artifacts or images projected on the surrounding screens. His presentation, titled "1,000 Years of Stewardship, Integrating Ancient Wisdom and Contemporary Practice," wove together archaeological evidence, indigenous knowledge, and practical agricultural experience into a compelling vision of balanced relationship with the land. "What we've discovered here isn't just an archaeological treasure," he explained, gesturing toward the ceremonial box that had started everything. "It's a reminder that human beings have been seeking sustainable relationship with this specific landscape for 1,000 years before we invented terms like sustainability or conservation. The ancient community that created these artifacts understood something profound about this place, its rhythms, its potential, its particular character as a living system." He described how the integration of traditional indigenous agricultural techniques with contemporary ecological science had transformed his struggling conventional farm into a thriving operation, producing specialized crops while actually improving soil health. The Three Sisters method of interplanting corn, beans, and squash, a traditional indigenous practice, had been validated by modern research, showing how this polyculture naturally maintains soil fertility while maximizing production from limited acreage. "My great-grandfather cleared this land using horses and hand tools, seeing himself as the first to truly work this soil," Michael continued. "Now I understand that he was actually the inheritor of centuries of careful human attention to this landscape. The agricultural methods my family practiced for 4 generations were just one chapter in a much longer story of human relationship with this place." Most compelling was his description of how archaeological discovery had transformed his personal understanding of legacy and stewardship. What had begun as a desperate struggle to save his family farm from foreclosure had evolved into a deeper commitment to preserving multiple layers of heritage, indigenous, agricultural, ecological, for future generations. "A year ago, I defined success narrowly as keeping this land in my family, continuing the Harrington farming tradition for one more generation," he acknowledged. "Now I understand that true stewardship is both humbler and more ambitious, recognizing ourselves as temporary caretakers within a much longer human story, responsible for preserving not just our own traditions, but the evidence and wisdom of those who came before us and the possibilities for those who will follow." As Michael concluded his address, the assembled scholars, indigenous knowledge keepers, and agricultural specialists responded with sustained applause, recognizing the authentic wisdom of someone whose perspective had been shaped by both practical experience and profound respect for diverse forms of knowledge. In academic contexts often characterized by disciplinary boundaries and methodological disputes, the Harrington Heritage Center had become a rare space where different approaches to understanding human relationship with the land could engage in productive dialogue. The symposium continued throughout the day, with presentations ranging from technical archaeological findings to indigenous oral traditions, from soil science data to practical farming demonstrations. What united these diverse contributions was a shared commitment to understanding how human communities had sustained themselves in relationship with this specific landscape across centuries of cultural and environmental change. During the afternoon break, Michael stepped outside for a moment of quiet reflection. The Heritage Center grounds were now a carefully designed landscape that honored both the archaeological significance of the ancient community and the continuing agricultural tradition of the Harrington farm. Visitors could explore reconstructions of indigenous structures based on archaeological evidence, observe heritage crop varieties being grown using traditional methods, and learn about the evolution of farming practices from ancient polyculture through family farming to contemporary sustainable agriculture. Jasper joined him, the faithful companion who had initiated this extraordinary journey, now content to rest in the autumn sunshine. Michael knelt to scratch behind the dog's ears, overcome with gratitude for the mysterious canine perception that had changed everything. "You saw what generations of humans missed, old friend," he said softly. The elderly border collie looked up at him with those intelligent eyes that had always seemed to perceive more than ordinary canine vision should permit. In that gaze, Michael felt connection not just to his loyal companion, but to all those who had called this land home across the centuries, the ancient craftspeople who had created the ceremonial box, the generations of indigenous community members who had lived in meaningful relationship with this landscape, the Harrington ancestors who had established the family farm, and now Michael himself, bridging past and future through thoughtful stewardship of a place whose significance transcended any single human lifetime. As the symposium participants emerged from the building for a scheduled tour of the archaeological excavation areas, Michael rejoined the group, stepping back into his role as the essential bridge between academic research and practical agricultural knowledge. Dr. Vasquez fell into step beside him as they walked toward the south field, where the most recent excavation had revealed evidence of specialized craft production areas. "What you've accomplished here goes beyond archaeological preservation or agricultural innovation," she observed. "You've created a model for how different knowledge traditions can engage in respectful dialogue about shared concerns, how to live sustainably on the land, how to honor both heritage and continuing life, how to learn from the past without being limited by it." Michael nodded thoughtfully. "That's what I find most meaningful about what's happened here. A year ago, I was just trying to save my family farm. Now I'm part of something much larger, a conversation across centuries about human relationship with this specific piece of earth." As the group reached the excavation area, Dr. Winters took over the technical explanation of recent findings, pointing out features that indicated specialized craft production and evidence of connections to distant Mississippian centers. Chief Sky added perspectives from indigenous oral traditions that complemented the archaeological evidence, while agricultural specialists noted how ancient settlement patterns reflected sophisticated understanding of microclimate and soil conditions. Michael stood slightly apart, watching this collaborative knowledge-making with quiet satisfaction. The farm that had nearly broken him financially had ultimately offered something far more valuable than mere economic survival. It had revealed itself as a place of genuine significance, where past and present, different cultural traditions, and diverse forms of knowledge could engage in meaningful dialogue. The financial security that had come with the Heritage Center's establishment was certainly welcome, resolving the crushing anxiety that had dominated Michael's life for years. But more profound was the transformation in how he understood his relationship with this land, What he had once viewed primarily as Harrington property, defined by legal ownership and agricultural productivity, he now recognized as a place where human communities had been finding meaning and sustenance for 1,000 years. He was not the owner of this story, but its current caretaker, responsible for ensuring that both the archaeological treasures and the living agricultural tradition would be preserved for future generations. This understanding had transformed his sense of purpose from the desperate struggle to maintain family ownership to a deeper commitment to balanced stewardship that honored multiple layers of heritage. As the tour concluded and the symposium participants returned to the Heritage Center for final presentations, Michael found himself filled with gratitude for the extraordinary journey that had begun with a simple accident, a plow blade striking an ancient box buried for centuries beneath a struggling family farm. What had seemed at first like mere good fortune, a financial lifeline thrown to a drowning farmer, had revealed itself as something far more profound, an invitation to understand his place in a 1,000-year story of human relationship with a specific landscape. The ancient craftspeople who had created the ceremonial box could never have imagined the modern world in which it would eventually be discovered. Yet in their careful preservation of sacred objects and symbolic representations, they had reached across centuries to share their understanding of a place that continued to sustain human life and meaning. In the careful stewardship of that legacy, Michael had found not just economic salvation, but a deeper purpose that connected him to both past and future in ways he could never have anticipated. As evening settled over the Harrington Farm Archaeological and Agricultural Heritage Center, visitors departed and staff completed their closing routines. Michael walked once more to the edge of the newly harvested East Field, Jasper following at his measured pace. Together they watched as the setting sun painted the landscape in golden light, illuminating a place where human beings had been finding meaning, sustenance and purpose for 1,000 years, a continuous thread of care and attention connecting ancient hands to modern ones through shared relationship with the living earth. "We're part of something bigger than ourselves, old friend," Michael said softly to the faithful companion who had changed everything. Jasper pressed against his leg in quiet agreement, his mission mysteriously accomplished, his perception vindicated beyond anyone's expectations. The ancient box had contained not just ceremonial objects, but a key that unlocked a deeper understanding of this specific place, its significance across time, its capacity to sustain diverse human communities, its power to connect past, present, and future through the enduring relationship between people and the land beneath their feet. In that understanding, Michael had found something far more valuable than financial security or archaeological fame. He had discovered his place in the ongoing human story, a meaningful role as bridge and translator between different ways of knowing and valuing the earth that had always been, in ways both seen and unseen, truly sacred ground. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.